We've been doing this series called Beginning and Ending. We're looking at the first chapters in Genesis and the last chapters in Revelation, thus not just the beginning and ending of the Bible, but the beginning and ending of this creation enterprise. And last week, we got to this portion in creation where God says, let's make humans in our image. And so we began then talking about image, and we said then that we would talk more about it today. And so, my word. Yeah. So in your Bibles, and I do want you to pay attention to your message notes, just so that you can kind of follow along with where we're at. But also at the end, there's just like this little bit of a evaluation that we're going to go through. But let's hear how the text reads. And besides noticing what it does say, I want you to pay attention to what it doesn't say. Sometimes what the scripture text doesn't say is as necessary to our understanding as what it does say. So, verse 26 of chapter 1. Then God said, "Let us make humans in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock and over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created humans in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful." Man, you ought to circle that. Be fruitful. I know some of you think that's just about having babies, but it's not. I mean, it includes that. But it's not just about having babies. So circle be fruitful. Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth. Subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Amen. May we be instructed, shaped, formed by the very word of God. All right, so here's where we left off last week, and I want you to get this. Sometimes I know the way it works is that we hear what we expect to hear and not what's actually said. Because you think you know where this is going to go, and so you just assume that maybe what's said about the text is what you were expecting it to say, when actually it could be quite different than what you thought it would say. So we're talking about what it means for us. Like, here we are, images of God. And I want you to notice something. I'll just brief on this. Last Sunday or this Sunday, you didn't hear me use the word image bearer. Like, a lot of people like that language. We bear the image of God. We're image bearers. Almost it's like we're carrying the image of God somehow. We're not. Like, be clear on what the text says. We are images of God. To say that we're an image of God says nothing about what constitutes us. It's not about our heart. It's not about our mind. It's not about the fact that we're moral beings. It's not about the fact that we are rational beings. It's not about having a heart, a soul, a spirit. Even though all those things are true, right? Like, we could spend a lot of time talking about what makes humans uniquely unique from the rest of creation. And those things that we ascribe to the image of God are true of us, and they might even be true of God, but it's not what it means to be created in the image of God. And you can't find it anywhere in the text, right? Like when you heard the text or when you read the text, you saw nothing about how we have moral character and we have rational comprehension and abilities. And you don't read any of that in the text. The only thing you read in the text is this: let's make man in our image, in our likeness. And so he did. And then he said, be fruitful, increase, subdue, have dominion, rule over. That's what it is to be in the image of God. That and nothing more. There's more to us than that. But that's what the image of God means. And the reason this is important is because when we start loading up that phrase, the image of God, with all these other things, then we begin to miss answering the question, how are we doing with this actual imaging God in creation? How are we actually doing at being the image of God in the creation? So the image of God, we said, was about our function in creation. It's the role that we play in the creation, the role that we play as opposed to everything else God made, because nothing else that God made was made in his image. The role that we play in his creation is to be his image. And so the writer of Genesis and the first readers of Genesis knew what that meant right away because they had images. And images only meant one thing. Images meant representations of the gods. So they had temples with images in them, representations of the gods. They had kings and rulers over kingdoms and empires who were also said to be the image of the God. And in that, they represented God. They were as God. So when they saw the word image, like they knew right away, oh, right, just like that's in those temples, or just like the king. And it's like, right. Like the image of God is to rule within God's creation. Are you with me? Oh, there I did it. Are we together on this? So this is important, and here's why. Remember what we said? Well, here's why is the whole message. So last week, we compared this to a car, right? Like Ford makes cars. But Ford isn't really interested in making cars. What they're really interested in making are, you know what Ford's really interested in making? Anybody? That came from all over. Yeah. So they're interested in making drivers, right? Because drivers pay for the cars and that makes money. Whoever said that? Like, you're brilliant. Where'd that come from? Ford is interested in making drivers. They can make all the cars in the world they want, but if they don't have drivers, there's no money, wherever that came, right? So they want to make drivers. And so this is what God does. He makes the car, and then he says, I need a driver. And he makes us. And he puts us behind the wheel of the car that he made. He puts us behind the wheel of creation. He creates, and then he hands us the keys and says, here. Now, here's another part of that analogy. And I admitted last week that, like, in a couple chapters, this analogy is going to wildly break down, but it hasn't broken down yet. So, if you buy a Ford, whose name is on the car? Ford, right. It's on the front, it's on the back. Ford's name is still in the car. So God's name is still on the creation, right? His fingerprints are all over the creation. God's name is still on the car, but we're driving it at his invitation, at his behest. So, like, we're the word that's often used amongst Old Testament scholars and others is that we're God's vice regents, if that word means anything to you. We're his vice regents. We're his partners. We represent God. We rule on his behalf. That's what it means to be in God's image. So the question is for us. Like, you can see how this could end up dangerous, right? Like, we could just think that's license to plunder the creation, including other people. So Jesus comes and he said, this is how you rule. This is how you rule. So in Matthew chapter 20, there's this really great story. They're on their way to Jerusalem, where Jesus is going to be turned over to the authorities and mocked and crucified. And so they're almost there, you know. And so, like, some of the disciples are getting the gist of this, that, like, okay, we're coming close to the end. I better put my bids in, right? So in Matthew, the way Matthew retells the story is the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, sons of thunder. The mother of James and John, her name's Mary. She comes to Jesus, but the boys are right behind her, right? And in Mark's version, like, he just sidesteps Mary. It's like, you know, this wasn't really Mary's question. This is John and James's deal. So she comes and she asks Jesus, when you come into your kingdom, right? So we know this is about ruling. Mark says, when you come in your glory, same thing. When you come into your kingdom, this is what I'd like. I'd like for one of my boys here to be your vice president, and I'd like my other boy to be your, like, chief of staff. I want them to sit on the right. I want them to sit on the left and the right. And Jesus, Jesus is just like Mark. He's like, forget about Mary. She's kneeling when she makes the request. He looks right over Mary, right at the boys, and says, basically, you don't know what you're asking. Like, can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with? And they say, yeah. They don't know. They say, yeah. And Jesus says, Bible stories are so great because they're so real. Jesus said, yeah, well, just wait because it is coming. And then he says, but it's for the Father to decide who sits where. Like, the Father's in charge of the seating arrangement, okay? But then he calls all of them in. Because the other 10 are angry. Because they had designs on certain positions as well, right? Like, they all want a cabinet position of some sort or another. And so they're just mad. And they are mad. It says they're angry. They're angry because James and John got there first, put in their request ahead of them. And Jesus calls them together and, you know, it's like, okay, boys, bring it in. Bring it in. And he says, look, we don't rule the way the Gentiles rule. So there's the text. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Okay, who's he talking about? The rulers of the Gentiles. Do you know? He's talking about the Romans, right? And the ruler of the Gentiles, the Romans, they lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Actually, some translations use the word tyrant, like they're tyrants over them. So the Romans, they rule with might. They rule with power. They rule with the sword. They rule with the threat of death. Like, literally, right? Cross us and you're going to die. And so this is how they rule. They rule with force. They rule with power. They rule with violence. That's how the Gentiles lord it over them. They rule with violence. And Jesus said, these are the best 4 words. You should underline these words. Not so with you. Not so with you. Like, we don't do it that way. We don't do it that way. And remember who's talking. Well, here's who's talking. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man. Okay, now let's be careful here about this title, Son of Man. This is not an ascription. It's not a title of humility. This is a royal title. All Jesus picks it up from the book of Daniel. It's a royal title. It's not about his humanity. It's about his royalty. It's about his kingship. It's almost as good as the word Christ, the world's one true king. And so he's like saying, just as the Son of Man, just as the world's one true king did not come to be served. Like, what? Kings aren't to be served? But to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is how we rule. This is what it means to take the authority as God's representative on the earth, to offer ourselves, to offer our lives, to serve. So we rule by serving. We rule by serving. To have a domain, it's not to dominate. I know it's like the same root word, but the connotations are just different. To have a domain is not to dominate. It's not to rule by intimidation. It's not to rule by threat. Listen, this is how the world always has done it. This is from the beginning of the fall, in every civilization throughout all of history, all over the globe, this is how people have ruled. They've ruled by threat. They've ruled by fear. Jesus says, again, not so with you. Don't do it that way. When you approach the creation, and when I say that, I mean like all of creation, okay? Like the earth, the land, the sky, the sea, other human beings, of all kinds, other human beings, when we engage them, when we approach them, what's really important is that they don't view us as a threat. Like we're not coming to them as a danger. But like our coming itself, our engagement in the creation, our engagement with other human beings is filled with promise and hope. Look, here comes one of God's images. It's so good. Here comes one of God's images. It's going to make things right. Here comes one of God's images that's going to restore things to the way they ought to be. Here comes one of God's images who's going to represent God to me, the Creator. And this image of God that's coming, offering promise and hope and care, is going to enhance me. Whether it's an inanimate object or another human being, it's going to enhance who I am. This is what it means. This is what it means to be the image of God. To represent God in the world, to rule on God's behalf, is not to rule with an iron fist. It is to rule with an open hand that cares. He carries his healing. Oh, shoot, I'm always doing that. He carries my healing in his hands. That's the way we come, representing the Creator. Carrying the healing of the creation, carrying the healing of other people in our hands. Man, like I want to ask, are you game for that? Can you see yourself as a God image, bringing hope, bringing promise to engage the rest of creation in a way that brings healing and not destruction? This is what it means to be the image of God. This is what it means to be human. So last week I asked you to read these two parables this past week. They're two very similar parables. Matthew records one of them, Luke the other. I'm sure like different groups, different places. Jesus tells similar stories in different ways. But it's the thing that we usually refer to it as the parable of the talents. So Matthew talks about talents. Luke talks about minas or pounds. And in Luke, they all get a different amount. One gets 5, one gets 2, one gets 1. In Luke, they all get 10, all right? 10 minas, 10 pounds, 3 days' wages, whatever it was. Everybody gets 10. The judgment comes, that is, the evaluation comes When the master so a master leaves town, says, here's 5, here's 2, here's 1, here's 10, here's 10, here's 10, here's 10. Like I'm going to come back, and I want to see what you've done with it. So he comes back, and there's an evaluation. What did you do with it? In other words, how well did you rule? How well did you have dominion over what I gave you? And so, like in Luke, one had 10 and he got 10 more. One had 10 and he got 5 more. One, and it's the same way in the parable of talents, one just kind of kept it. Now, this is really important. He didn't waste it. He still had it. One of them, and so in the parable of the talents in Matthew, he buries it to make sure nothing goes wrong with it. That person is called wicked and judged accordingly. The other two took it, did something with it, and they're rewarded. Look at how they're rewarded here. I think we got that. We got that? Yeah. Jesus' words, well done, my good servant. Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, the 10 pounds, take charge of 10 cities. Take charge of more. Like I put you in charge of this, you did good, I'm going to put you in charge of more. Now I know for a lot of you, this totally destroys your image of heaven. Because you thought heaven was going to be like this spiritual retirement community, right? Like you were going to go down to Florida and be in this community with all these other people that are the same age as you, and every day is going to be a Saturday. That's what my brother always reminds me. Every week is 6 Saturdays, and then there's a Sunday. And you think that's what heaven's going to be. Not so. Let me remind you that the very last line of the story in Revelation 22, not the last line of the chapter again, because there's a postscript, but the very last line of the story in Revelation 22 is, and they will reign with him forever and ever. We're going to be in charge of something, and I have no idea what 10 cities alludes to, but you get the idea. It's a parable, right? You're going to be in charge of something, and what you're in charge of will depend upon how fruitful you were in fulfilling your role as a God image in this creation. We always want to think it's about just being faithful, but it's about being fruitful. It's about enhancing everything that we engage in life. Does that make sense? Everywhere you engage as a God image, you're to enhance it. You're to make it better. So, think about what happens on this platform when and we have so many good musicians and our excellent worship leader who puts it together. But think about we'll talk about somebody that's not here. Jim Kirkwood. Don't worry, Don, I'm not touching one single thing up here. So, man, he's got all these knobs and all these pedals and all these devices, and he's got this object here. And think of what this object think of what it was. It was a piece of wood and catgut. Is that what strings are made out of, Don? Used to be? Yeah. What are they made out of now? Just steel. All right. But it's nothing to me, right? And then somebody takes it, this wood and metal, and makes it a guitar. That's the stuff of God images. But more than that, Jim and all these guys, Chris and Don and Matt and David and Sean and they take these things and they make music come out of them that enhances our worship, right? It enhances our worship experience. It's way more enhanced than if Matt and I got up and led singing. You might just want to trust me on that one. You won't want to give it a try. So you get it, right? Like, this is what it means to be a God image. Like, you're enhancing the things that God created. So we have this idea, I think, and if we just thought about it, we would think otherwise. But we have this idea that pristine is good, and it is. Pristine is good. It's just not best. So pristine, that just means like the original condition, right? So when you does anybody want to raise their hand and say they don't have one of these? But like, you've got a phone or a device or a laptop, right? Like some of you are even using them right now. So like, go ahead, raise your hand. You got a phone, a laptop, a device. Okay, keep your hands up. You have one of these, maybe all three, but you have. How many of you that have your hands up that have a phone, a device, or a laptop, how many of you use it just as it came out of the box? Anybody? Like, you haven't done one single thing to it. Haven't downloaded an app, haven't put an extension on it. I don't know what kind of things you can do with laptops anymore. No, like, nobody. Nobody wants to take their iPhone, which is what you should have. No one wants to take their iPhone and return it to factory settings. That would be pristine. What you've done instead is you've taken it out of the box in its pristine condition and you've made it better, right? Because you downloaded certain apps, you've done certain things to it, you put a cover on it. I don't know what all you do to your phones, but you made it better than it was when it came out of the box. I want you to get this. This is the calling of God upon our lives as His images, to take what God created and gave us and to make it better. Now, I know that we think that's almost blasphemous, but it's not blasphemous if it's what God specifically said to do. Like, here's what I made. And this is the instruction to Adam and Eve. Here's the garden. I want you to tend to it. I want you to tend the garden. Like, make this garden better. Make it a better place. So we don't want things that are pristine. Pristine is what the wicked servants did in the parable. They took what the master gave them and buried it. I'm going to keep it just nice and neat, just the way it was, so that when the master comes back, I'll be able to give it back to him just like he gave it to me. And Jesus calls that wicked. Pristine is wicked. Sort of. I mean, that's what Scripture seems to say right there. So we take it and we perfect it. To be God images is not to bury the talent. So I was asking us about how we're doing. So how are we doing? Like this whole notion of taking what God gave us, His images, and partnering with Him to make it better. How are we doing with that? Well, so in some cases, like, we're doing pretty good, right? Like in some cases, like humans, God images, we're doing some pretty terrific things with creation, are we not? So like this summer, how many of you enjoyed corn on the cob? Okay, me too. How many of you would have rather had maize? Yeah, like if you've ever had maize, the answer to that question is no. Like butter and sugar corn is so much better. How do you think we got that? Like we took the maize and we made it better. How about, here's some other good things. How about what George Washington Carver did? George Washington Carver took a peanut. Wish I had one. I'd show you. He just took an ordinary peanut, which are pretty good, right? Like I like peanuts just all by themselves. But he took a peanut, he made 300 different products from it. He took something good and he made it better. Okay, here's some other things. How about pizza? Bingo, right. Pizza's good. We did that, right? We took all the ingredients that God made and we put them together and we made pizza. That's good. better. How about baseball? Oh, God didn't invent baseball. Like everything we do, yeah. So baseball, that's good. Vaccines. Vaccines are good. Like nobody wants to get smallpox. Nobody wants to get polio. Nobody wants to get tuberculosis. Nobody wants to get measles or mumps or rubella. Like every single year, people take a flu shot because like there's a 50-50 chance that it'll prevent them from getting the flu. And who wants the flu? I don't. COVID vaccines, like they're not perfect, but it's saving somebody's life. Vaccines. How about automobiles? How many would rather be riding how many would rather have a horse and buggy? Like, no, of course not. It's a dumb question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll get to that. Automobiles. How about rockets? Rockets that carry telescopes into space so we can see some of the farther reaches of the universe, and rockets that carry people into space. How about cows? Like, is anybody objecting to cows? What a great animal. Like, we domesticate these cows, and we somehow get milk out of them, and cheese out of them, and best of all, we get steak out of them, right? Cows are, we didn't make cows, we just made them better. See, I know, you're starting to feel like, oh, this is so blasphemous. Now, here's the thing about this. Again, this is what God images do. We take what God made and we make it better. Like that's the Bible. Now, but it's not the fall. So here's the fall. Because none of these things that we took and made better, none of them work perfectly, right? Like cows actually cause heart attacks. And rockets explode with people in them. And cars pollute. I lived in Los Angeles for 3 years, and the 210 freeway ran right behind my apartment, and right beyond the 210 freeway were the Altadena Mountains. I moved in June. I never saw the Altadena Mountains until September because of the pollution almost exclusively created by cars. If you ever flew over Los Angeles, you would have seen this. You thought it was a cloudy day, but it wasn't. It was just a cloud of gray hanging over the city. A little over 20 years ago, I traveled to India, and I was in the capital city of Delhi. And in Delhi, everybody drives a little black car that runs on diesel engines. Cars are great, but the air in Delhi, you would want to wear a mask because you could see the black particles floating. So it's like all these things that we create and make better are somehow bad as well. Like we're this box of ironies is what we are as God images. Like wars have led to life-enhancing discoveries. Isn't that an irony? Like World War II led to the developing of things like super glue, ballpoint pens. Anybody still use a fountain pen? Like, yeah, not by preference, just because you like the novelty of it. Because ballpoint pens are clearly an improvement to fountain pens, right? So World War II is responsible for super glue, ballpoint pens, computers, jet engines, and maybe the best thing about penicillin. We have penicillin because it was developed during World War II. Oh, war must be great. No, it's not. No, it's not. And then here we are. We have this human brilliance and ingenuity that leads us to developing sophisticated weapons of destruction. So, like that, think of this irony, right? Like amazing creativity, right? Creativity, that leads to shocking. Oh, that was George Bush's words, wasn't it? Shocking destruction. Come on, like that leaves our head scratching. So in some ways we're doing very well, but overall, we seem to not be living well into this creation enterprise. We seem not to be doing well as God images. Paul actually said in Romans 8, all creation's groaning. Like the creation is groaning, waiting for what Paul referred to as our adoption as sons. Like creation is calling out to its creator saying, would you please fix these people? Because they're killing us. So I think Jesus would gather us together and say, not so with you. Not so with you. Like, as God images, you're working to enhance, to make better every part of creation that you connect with. So there's a list of some samples of where you connect with creation in your bulletin. So you might want to mark. So are those engagements, are those parts of creation, are they better or worse because of your engagement in them as God images? So what about your spouse? It's a really good place to start. Would you say your spouse is better or worse because they're married to you? You can go and ask them right now if they're sitting with you, if you want to dare. And you can apply that to your whole family, right? Is your whole family better off or worse off because you're a part of it? What about your friendships? Are your friends like better off? Are they better people because they're friends with you? That's what it means to be a God image. Like your friends will be a better person because they're friends with you. What about where you work? Wherever you work, is that like, is the company you work for, are they doing weller than they would because you're one of their employees? Or maybe you own the company. So like, are your employees, are your vendors, are your customers, are they better or worse because of the company that you own and the company that you run? And you can just apply this to social systems, social organizations, like the community that you live in, the neighborhood that you live in. Better or worse because you're a part of it. The church that you're in, which happens to be this one. And we're delighted for that. But is it better or worse because you're a part of this church? Like apply that to any organization, any team that you might be a part of. The country of which you're a citizen, better or worse because you're a citizen of it. Look, remember what Jesus said about the world, not so with you. So this is what the world does. This is what the world thinks. The world thinks I should be better because of all these things I'm a part of, right? Like, I'm leaving my wife, I'm not. I'm leaving my wife because she just doesn't fulfill me. She just doesn't do anything for me anymore that I need. So I'm leaving my wife. Or I'm quitting my job because they don't do anything for me. Happens in churches all the time, right? Like, this church really just isn't meeting my needs. So I'm going to go to another church, and I'm going to drain from them what I need. Not so with you, said Jesus. You're a God image. Like, you bring to your marriage. You don't take from it. You bring to your place of work. You don't take from it. You bring to your church. You bring to your community. You bring to your neighborhood. You don't take from it. You bring hope and promise and care. How are we doing? How are we doing? You got more betters circled than worse? Every misuse of the creation, every advantage we take of another human being is because we thought that ruling, we thought having dominion meant improving our lot, meant making us better. But we're here to advance others, to advance the creation. Okay, so let me close with this. Put my music stand over there because I knew it would give you hope. When Paul writes to the Colossians, this is what he says about Jesus in chapter 1, verse 15. The Son, that is Jesus, the Son is the image of the invisible God. Okay, who did God make in his image? Humans, right? So Jesus is, let me affirm, Jesus is fully God. We never say otherwise. He's fully God. But that's not what this is saying. This is saying Jesus is what it means to be human. Let's make humans in our image. Okay, that didn't go so well. The Son, oh, there's an image. The image of the invisible God. Jesus shows us what it is to be truly human. You want to know what it is to be a God image? Then you don't look to be served. You look to serve and to give your life as a ransom for many. Because that's what the full, the truly human one did, Jesus. He's the image of God. Now, the really cool thing is, and we could spend a lot of time in Colossians. If I only had one letter from the New Testament, this would be it. Not because it's pleasing to me, because it's so complete. This is what he says in verse 3, or chapter 3, about us. He talks about our salvation, and in our salvation, we put on a new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge in the image of its creator. That's what salvation is. It's our being renewed into the image of God in which we were created. Just like Jesus. So, you know what? I want this to be an encouraging thing for us. Because I could go around, I could point to so many of you. Because I know what a lot of you do. I mean, I know where you work, and I know where your life engages. And all those places, some of those places, it's like, yeah, like you're doing it. You're doing it. You're imaging God because you're improving on the creation. You're bringing hope and promise and care to the creation. Like, Lane, I know most of your trees don't do this, but like, I'm so glad for paper. I don't want to write on clay tablets, you know? And so we have these people that go into the woods and they cut down trees and plant new ones so that we can always have paper instead of clay or papyrus. Isn't that better? Isn't that enhancing the creation? Like, just think about your job. Or think about where you engage with others in any way. Like, it can be in the church or your neighborhood. Are you, can I say it like this? Are you adding value? I mean, that's what the parable's about, right? They added value. Are you being fruitful? Are you adding value? That's what it is to be a God image.